Welcome to the Take the North podcast on your free Odyssey app. I'm David Haugh on the Mully and Haugh Show, weekdays 5:30 to 10 on The Score. Dan Wiederer covers the Chicago Tribune. We are talking to you on the first day of the league new year. Happy New Year, everybody. And Dan, there's a lot going on. We're going to get to it all. Things will be fluid. Things will be changing. News will be breaking. But I think we take a step back. You look at the big picture, and you've got to start here. Today is the day that there's a new NFC North reality. Aaron Rodgers came out of the cave and picked a lane. He is on his way to New York, presumably once they dot the I's and cross the T's, and the NFC North up for grabs. You agree?
100%. I've said multiple times throughout this week, and then obviously rubber stamping it today, that of all the developments that will happen for the Chicago Bears in a landmark 2023 offseason, this may be a top 3 development. Aaron Rodgers' departure from the division after 15 years of tormenting this franchise is next level progress for the Chicago Bears. We don't know what Jordan Love's going to be. The law of averages says he's not going to be Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, right? And so you breathe a sigh of relief. And David, I put it on Twitter on Wednesday afternoon, the gif of the Wicked Witch of the West under the house, because that's what this is. Let the munchkins out and let them sing Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, because that is what the feeling in Chicago should be for what is a landmark moment for a franchise that has been beaten down for far too long by one man.
And this will play out in different acts and different stages, and it will be New York's drama, and Aaron Rodgers hits Broadway. That's fine. It will be louder. It will be messier. It will be amplified, and that is New York's problem. Right now, You look at the Packers, and you're right. There's uncertainty surrounding the quarterback situation. You look at the Vikings. They're shedding payroll. Who knows what they're going to be next year as they reconfigure and build around Justin Jefferson and a quarterback maybe to be named later. And here come the Lions, the mighty Lions, who might be the odds-on favorite after getting David Montgomery. We'll talk about that in a moment, but having a lot of draft capital, being on the way up. And then there are the Bears, who want to sustain success, who want to gradually get back to respectability. But I do wonder this, Dan, as we talk about the implications of this big picture shift, this seismic shift in the division. What will that do to the expectations entering 2023 and Ryan Poles' desired timetable?
Well, before we get to the timetable, let's point this out, that there were almost 500,000 people watching the live stream of the Pat McAfee show of Aaron Rodgers announcing the grudges that he has and those that he doesn't have, which are all sort of intertwined in some weird soup that he probably ate inside that cave. Look, he told us right here on this podcast a few weeks ago that he was having hallucinations about Cobby and Big Dog and bringing Randall Cobb and Mercedes Lewis up to New York. And guess what? It looks like it's going to happen. Like, he broke that here on the Take the North podcast. He told us that he had talked to Robert Saleh in one of his fever dreams. All of these things happened. Aaron Rodgers today, David, it was wild to sit through that 56 minutes of him basically saying, I think at first he was 90% sure he was going to retire when he went into the cave. And then 5 minutes after he got out of the cave, he had a text message or two that made him feel really, sort of uneasy. And because of those text messages and how the Packers handled him, all of a sudden he had all this, he didn't call it bitterness or resentment, but this bitterness and resentment that built up that convinced him to play. And then he said, I don't have any bitterness or resentment, while listing all of the things that caused him to feel bitter and slighted and move on. And hopefully eventually this trade will become official and Aaron will be in New York. But it was wild to watch this mind turn in the ways it was trying to twist this story into whatever conveniently fit in the lane that he wanted to fit in. As for the Bears' expectations, and you can respond to all that drama stuff in a second, I don't think Ryan Poles can be knocked off his spot, so to speak, just because of this one development. I think your entire mission is to build a football team that can sustain long-term success. And that doesn't mean you go after it quicker just because the division's open a little bit more. You try to build a football team that can be a real deal championship team for 5, 6, 7 years in a row. And that's going to be slow. It's going to be methodical. And as we're seeing in free agency, it's going to take a piece by piece, bite by bite approach to get it done.
Yeah, you can't allow there to be a distraction. You can't allow yourself to be undisciplined to the point where you change your own priority list and you change your own plan based on the way somebody else does something. I think that's the way you make mistakes. That's the way maybe you skip a step. We hear all the time about coaches, players, executives, not skipping steps. And I think the temptation would be, oh boy, the Packers are coming back to us. Oh boy, the division is there for the taking. But what does that mean? Does that mean you're going to, maybe go after a free agent at a position that you would typically draft? Or does it mean, I'm not quite sure if you would rush a guy. You have different ways that could manifest itself. I think I just said manifest itself. But you know what I mean? So I think that it can't change your timetable, but I think it makes it a lot more intriguing to look at the NFC North. And I think it looks a lot more enticing when you evaluate what it means to the Bears Packer rivalry. And frankly, it's a new day, and the Lions, the Lions being what they are or could be, it's always fun to see whether or not teams can fulfill their potential. And let's face it, the Lions are interesting because they have a crazy head coach. They've got a different dynamic, and they've got a redemption story at quarterback. And now they've got a Bears leader in their backfield, which seems going to be odd, but it's going to change the tenor of that rivalry for the next couple years.
No question. One more little footnote on Aaron Rodgers. He started in Green Bay for 15 seasons. He was their QB1. He swept the Bears in the season series 9 times. He beat them twice in 22 days in January of 2011, as you remember well, on his way to his only Super Bowl. And so when you remove that from your equation and you realize, hey, we might be able to get 1, possibly 2 wins against Green Bay going forward, it suddenly alleviates some of that pressure that's been built up inside Halas Hall. You talk about David Montgomery's exit to Detroit in free agency, and I've talked about this in a couple places where it's one of those moments that you saw coming, and you forecast that this was the likely end result. But when it becomes official, there is a moment as somebody who has gotten to know David Montgomery over 4 years where you feel it a little bit and you go, man, that's just rough. It's just the cruel nature of that position in this league and how quickly a guy who did everything right and who was everything that you claimed he would be when you drafted him in 2019 has to go find a new home just because of the dynamics of roster building, the supply and demand, the price points, all those things that go into this. And so, I wish David Montgomery the best of luck in Detroit. But Jeremy Langford was here until Jordan Howard was here, and Jordan Howard was here until Dave Montgomery was here. Now Dave Montgomery was here until the next guy gets here, whether that's in the draft or if it's Khalil Herbert for the long haul, whatever it may be. That's just the revolving door that runs at that position. And now it's up to the Bears to find a little bit more stability, talent, and depth to solidify that room amid all the other rooms that they still have to solidify. And I know you have plenty to say on this, that there's a few rooms in there that we thought we would be sitting here on Wednesday night saying, boy, that feels a lot more solid, and they are not solid.
Yeah, you're right, but you preach patience, so I'm trying to be patient as much as I can, whether it's on the morning show or right here on the Take the North podcast. You can get the Take the North podcast on your free Odyssey app. You can watch us on 670 The Score's YouTube page. You can download, listen, and subscribe. Give us your feedback. Let us know what you think. But, Dan, you're exactly right. Here we are a couple days into free agency, and the David Montgomery thing we'll get to in a moment, but I've been a little surprised at how, if the one thing has surprised me, it's that the most glaring needs going in remain glaring needs. And I feel like defensive tackle, offensive tackle should have been number 1 and number 1A on your priority list. And I understand you strike when you can, so you get the linebackers. And I understand that you might not have been able to get Mike McGlinchey if you identified him as a target, so you can't get everything you want. But as we sit here on Wednesday night in the first official day of the league year, and the Bears still have, weaknesses at both tackle spots, you're Ryan Poles, and you feel happy about what you've been able to accomplish, but committed to doing much more. And I think that's the way you feel as an observer. I'm not going to tell fans how to feel, because I think there's a euphoria that has swept over Chicago, and I understand that, but I still think there's a lot of work to do.
I usually don't need the kind of reining in that I think I might need right now. And you're right to remind me that I preached patience for the last 3-4 weeks going into this thing. The problem here is that, look, like, we've got time, right? And Ryan Poles still has time to fill out this roster. I think right now, as we sit here, there's 57 players under contract. You got 10 draft picks. You're going to bring in probably 10 to 15 undrafted free agency when the draft ends. And so you're looking at maybe a dozen more veteran free agent signings over the coming weeks. Well, they've got to come somewhere. And I looked this up. 3 times today, just to make sure I had this correct. But Ryan Poles was asked in January at the end of season press conference how much he could get done in one off season, understanding that there was a mountain of work. And he said, your priorities have to be the premium positions, and that's pass rushers, cornerbacks, and offensive linemen, right? And so to this point, we've added one situational pass rusher in DeMarcus Walker, who most people in the league just go, shrugs these, and no corners and no offensive linemen. I mean, Nate Davis comes in as a guard, but he's not at the tackle position, which I think we identified as a need. And so when we go up Thursday morning to talk to Ryan Poles and get an overview of this, it's not just going to be hey, tell us about the new guys. It's going to be like, what do you see here that's allowing you to have the patience you have, and how much work do you still need to do to get this roster fortified?
So let's talk about that specific position, offensive tackle, for a moment, because the guy at the center of the questions is Orlando Brown Jr. He was on ESPN on Wednesday afternoon, NFL Live, I believe, and he addressed his status. I think he called the process a little weird. To me, he sounded a little bit, I don't want to say confused, but he said a lot of things you expect somebody whose status is uncertain to say and to sound like, and he doesn't know where he's going to play. He didn't reveal too much about specific teams that are involved. Dan, when it comes to Orlando Brown Jr. and Adam Schefter's contention that the league considers him a right tackle, he is insistent on playing the left side. Brian Baldninger told us on the Mully and Haugh show that is what he wants to play. Ross Tucker reiterated that on Wednesday morning. Do you think the Bears are trying to wait this out? Ryan Poles trying to wait until Orlando Brown Jr. comes around? Do you know, or have you heard how involved they are, if they are involved at all?
I don't have much to that end, and it's been quiet on that end. I'm interested to learn that because, look, we've documented that Ryan has one season of overlap in Kansas City with Orlando Brown. He should know the player. He should have open lines of communication. There should be easy ways to figure out, is this going to work or is it not going to work? And right now, everything just seems kind of stuck in a holding pattern, and we're all kind of waiting to see what happens. If Orlando Brown ends up signing in the next 2 or 3 days, one of the more notable free agent signings that came later than expected was Akeem Hicks, and I think that was 2016, and you were waiting for it, and then it came, and that guy turned out to be a pretty good difference-making player for you for a while, and so you're hopeful on that, and that's why free agency is so uncomfortable, because it's not on a schedule, and so you just don't know when things are going to get to a resolution or whether they're going to go down a different road, and until that happens, you just can't kind of get a sit pat. I think back to the Cubs, and you would probably have more knowledge on this than I do, but there was like the 4 shortstops coming in this offseason, and there was like that trepidation for a while, like, oh my God, they're going to get shut out. And then all of a sudden they get a deal with Dansby Swanson, and everybody breathed a sigh of relief, and it felt better, right?
That's a really good comparison. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of that, but you're right, because there was the Correa, there was Trey Turner, and there was all this activity and all this noise, and you're waiting and wondering. And the idea was, much like the Bears needing an offensive tackle, the Cubs were fixated on getting a shortstop, one of the top 4, and that's a good comparison. I think in time the Cubs were able to get the deal that was maybe the most intelligent of the 4 deals. But I just don't know. Xander Bogaerts was the 4th shortstop, went to the Padres, who they overpaid for him. But that's part of free agency. I do wonder.
And Correa wound up with 5 teams, right?
Yeah, Correa. Yeah, exactly. 5 teams. And
the Bears may be able to get him before it's all said and done.
5 teams and 6 specialists later, he was back in Minnesota. So I wonder if at the end of this, maybe if the Bears are satisfied with their free agent targets that as the Cubs were with theirs, this is going to be a very good offseason for Ryan Poles. It already is trending in that direction, but I do want to withhold judgment. That doesn't mean, again, you understand this better than I do, or we both kind of are in it together. Misery loves company. It's not being critical of the job Ryan Poles has done. Quite the opposite. I think I commend him for the trade that he made. We both have been positive about that. He was aggressive off the get-go, but this is incomplete. It's like it is evaluating a movie, about halfway through it. So let's wait and see, because they do need an offensive tackle. They need a defensive tackle, and they need help at the premium positions. And why do we think that? Because Ryan Poles told us that.
Correct. And we'll see what he has to tell us on Thursday morning when he speaks in Lake Forest, and it'll be fascinating to see where that conversation goes. I had a call from someone connected to the building earlier today who was kind of feeling me out on my reaction. He said, feels like you're not all that high. I just said, save my celebrations for actual achievement. And I just don't think they've achieved anything. It's really nice to say, oh, the Bears made all these signings. Well, yeah, of course the Bears were going to make all these signings because they had more holes than any team in the National Football League to fill. And so, of course, you were going to add starters. I don't know that anybody came into this week, with highlight tapes of Nate Davis and DeMarcus Walker and TJ Edwards on their social media pages. Like those weren't the names that people were throwing out at the grand wish list. This was the year where you had almost $100 million in cap space to spend, and you were going to go out and make some big ticket signings. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying, like, if you want to look at this roster and understand how much more needs to be done, particularly when you and I have talked about for months, the trenches, you need guys that can rush the passer and stop the run, and you need people that can protect your quarterback. And right now I look at those positions and I'm jarred at how little they have in terms of talent and depth at both of those, or all three of those spots.
Last thing for me in the offensive tackle situation. This is also part of why I think it's important to continue to make this a priority and to stress this point, because let's go back to during the season when one of the things that I think was an acceptable explanation for why Justin Fields was limited in the passing game, it was because he didn't have adequate protection. He didn't have the right weapons around him. And that was used as rationale, understandably so, for why maybe he struggled with accuracy, why he didn't have time to throw, why he didn't take that next step in the passing game. Well, next year is a big year for his development. Actually, the crucial year, because the Bears have protection. If he doesn't develop as much as they think he can, then they can move on. In order to do that, the same people that were clamoring for him to get help and for them to protect Justin Fields and to give him weapons, you can't now say it doesn't matter as much when Ryan Poles isn't going out and getting one of those guys to help protect Justin Fields, a left tackle or a right tackle, whatever side, get a tackle. So I think that's what we're doing. We're following the pattern. Okay, fine. You want to continue to develop your franchise quarterback. You've identified him as the guy. I would do that too. But now follow through. Even if you have to overspend and overpay, that's part of the reality of losing 14 games and getting yourself in this position. Your cupboard is bare. Start to refill it, even if it's a little expensive.
Well, look, in our last episode, you were putting together the schedule and the acts for the No Excuses Tour, right?
That's right.
The No Excuses Tour can't get off the ground while there's still excuses. So we got to eliminate the excuses before we get to September. And so now it's a matter of figuring out what you can do in these value waves of free agency, figuring out what you can do in the draft. Look, like I go back to things that we were talking about in November and December. If you are attaching your hopes to the idea that Ryan Poles is going to get into the 2023 draft and hit 650, I don't know what to tell you, because history will tell you that is an outlier, and you're not going to have a draft that is going to get you long-term answers at all these positions. And so you better just try to find some competence. And the one thing that, just like I say, that just keeps jarring me is putting together the 2-deep depth chart at every position and eliminating the starters, and then looking at the second line and going, oh my God, not only do they have starters to fill, but look at what the depth looks like. It's awful. Their depth right now on March 15th at almost 5 o'clock is awful. It's not competitive. And so they've got a long way to go to get themselves to a point where they have depth that means something.
All right, there's a lot of things I want to get through quickly, a couple of quick thoughts on each of them, Dan, but I do want to update. You mentioned the No Excuses Tour. I have a soft yes from Kenny Chesney to perform Boys of Fall before to open for Justin Fields, but it depends on how free agency goes. So I'll let you know. Kenny Chesney, though, is a definite maybe on the No Excuses Tour. All right, so David Montgomery, here's what I want to know. We talked about what it means to the Lions and how the Bears may move on. 3 years, $18 million. Dan, what was it about David Montgomery's price tag that made Ryan Poles think it was too rich for the Bears' blood? He said he valued him. He said he liked him, but apparently he liked him not to the point where he wanted to pay that to keep him.
It's everything that we talked about. It's the needs at so many other positions. It's the need for quality depth. It's the understanding that what we just said, you've gotten Jordan Howard in round 5 and David Montgomery in round 3, and you can go back to the draft every few years, and Khalil Herbert was a 6th round pick, and you can find a reliable starter on day 3 of the draft pretty consistently, or late day 2 if so desired, and you can figure out a way to make that work. It's the cruel nature of the position. It's not as if David was a 1,400 yard 12 touchdown guy a year ago. Khalil Herbert actually probably was the more productive rusher through most of 2022. And so it is what it is. Look, I've told people for a long time that Dave Montgomery's value to the Bears goes far beyond anything that you'll read on a Pro Football Reference stat sheet. He was a heartbeat in that locker room. He set a tone. He was a guy that did everything you asked, and you want those guys in your building. There's just a point where when you've got so many different needs to fill, you want to save those resources for what we talked about, the premium positions. And right now, running back's not in that equation. It still leaves me with those questions about linebacker, and we can get into that in a minute. But I think that's where it is. And I'll be interested. Like David, we get to hear now. David Montgomery will go in front of a room in Detroit before the week's up, and he'll tell us about his feelings. And it's always fun to be kind of a fly on the wall in those media availabilities, just to hear how a guy's exit is and what his arrival to a new place feels like. Multiple choice question: the Bears will replace David Montgomery with A, Miles Sanders, B, Austin Eckler in a trade, C, Bijan Robinson with the number 9 overall selection or moving down to draft him, or D, none of the above. What was A? A was Miles Sanders. No, I don't think you're going to go there. Eckler, no, you're not trading away capital for that guy. Why? I think because of what we just talked about, because they're going to have to give away all of this stuff. You're going to have to give away draft picks and money to get a guy that you think you can. I mean, where was that Austin Eckler drafted? I have to look that up and understand that the next Austin Eckler's out there somewhere. I know where he ends up a lot, and that's the end zone. Correct. No, you're right on that. Now, so like the Bijan Robinson thing is fascinating to me because there are 99 cases you can make for why it would make no sense for the Bears to draft Bijan Robinson at number 9. And I subscribe to those. And I say, don't do it. Don't do it. But there is the case that he could be picked there at number 9. And based on everything that you talked to about just sheer talent and productivity and certainty about NFL level productivity, if you're looking for a guy that's like, okay, you can't miss on him, he's as close as you're going to come, down there at 9. And so like every time I say, no, there's this little thing in the back of my head that says, if they did it, I wouldn't condemn him for it. I really wouldn't, because that dude is a football player. And look, like the rationale, and we'll get into this in April when we're talking more about this at length as the draft's approaching. The rationale is you don't want to waste the prime of a talented running back like this, the first couple of years of his career on a team that's not contending for everything, because you're just wasting it. You're just wasting that period of time. It's too bad they couldn't draft him and redshirt him for a couple of years down the road. But the other part of it is you need playmakers, and that guy's a playmaker, and he winds up in the end zone a lot, and he's got a lot of talent and a lot of things that would fit nice. Look, I'm still on the don't do it, but if they did it, I'd be like, okay, like I don't have a problem with it. The 5th player the Bears added in free agency, Travis Homer, speedster, special teams guy. I think it was more coincidence than counter move that it was announced within an hour or so, or it came to terms with him after the David Montgomery news. What do you know about Travis Homer? Yeah, I think you're looking at a guy that's a depth piece in that room. I think you're looking at a guy that can come in on third down and give you a little bit, maybe as a pass catcher and a pass blocker. Probably going to see the bulk of his Chicago Bears production as a special teams contributor. And so that's one of those moves that fans will get upset about, because it's not a replacement for David Montgomery. They're going to find David Montgomery's replacement elsewhere. Travis Homer is just he's a guy that's going to fill a role that needs to be filled. And that's like what we have to just keep emphasizing, is there are a lot of roles that need to be filled, because their depth chart is not full of depth pieces or special teams, locked in contributors. And so you've got to get those guys somewhere. And that feels like what that is to some extent. And obviously Ryan can tell us a little bit more about his vision when we meet with him on Thursday. You mentioned he's talking on Thursday. Looking forward to that conversation. It's been a busy week all over the place for Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus. On Tuesday, they were at Northwestern's Pro Day. Peter Skronsky, I think, was kind of the subject of a lot of conversation and speculation. Pat Fitzgerald kind of sparked it himself, said the first thing he thought when he saw the Bears made the trade was Skronsky to the Bears, because he grew up a Bears fan. He knows what he needs. Number 9, it would make sense. So, Dan, that's Tuesday with Skronsky in the mix. And then on Wednesday, we saw pictures of Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles in Georgia at the Pro Day for the Georgia Bulldogs. Jalen Carter showed up 9 pounds heavier than he was at the Combine,
couldn't finish his individual drills, somebody who already had a lot of questions surrounding his dependability, reliability, and character, raised even more questions about that on Wednesday. Where do you think that's headed? And just if you could summarize both days, Evanston, Athens, what the Bears got out of it.
I never lose my mind over pro days. And if you remember a couple years ago, Zach Wilson made everyone's jaw drop at a pro day, and it was like the talk for 10 days. Oh, look at this throw he made. All right, we saw how that turned out. So you kind of have to take a deep breath at pro days. That said, the Jalen Carter stuff today, given the turbulence of the month that Jalen Carter has had, was problematic. He didn't look good. Then you watch the video of him going through some of the drills, and the first thing I said was, my God, if somebody gets him a copy of the Matt Eberflus hits instructional video, Matt Eberflus is going to fall off his chair. He's going to go, my God, I like grading loaves. There's more loaves in here to build a bread factory, for God's sakes. And so that is not a good sign for Jalen Carter. He's costing himself money this month. He's plummeting down the draft board. And I understand that there's this great intrigue because of where he was valued and how disruptive he can be, and when he's at his best, what that looks like. There's Hall of Fame level talent inside there, but holy God, man, there are a lot of question marks, and it feels like week after week another one comes into the mix, and some team is going to have to wrap their brains around all of that and figure out when is the right time to roll those dice. Obviously, the Bears were there. Matt Eberflus was one of 3 coaches at the Georgia Pro Day. I think it was Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith, who came from just down the road, were the other 2. The Georgia Bulldogs have about 27 other draft eligible prospects that are worth looking in on. So it was more than just one guy that they were zeroing in on. But my God, David, I don't know how you feel about this. It feels like there's so much homework to be done on this kid over the next 7 weeks to even get yourself to a point of even considering it, even at number 9.
I think that, as we said earlier, there's a different risk-reward calculus at 9 than there was at 1, or 1 even 9 than there is at 5. But when you're the Bears and you do espouse all these things about character and culture, and you also
hustle,
and then you have somebody who is clearly out of shape or troubled or distracted or has all these things hanging over his head, I'm not quite sure that it would make sense. But this got to play out. He did not represent himself well today. The thing is, Dan, you got teams in front of you. You got the Lions at 6 that you wonder. They're going to be trying to accumulate talent. They might be in a position to take more risks because they haven't won in so long. So I do wonder, but it is something worth monitoring. I think it's almost like the profile for Peter Skronsky, local guy, Northwestern. The most critical thing you can say about him is he's got short arms, And he's going to be somebody who is reliable and may be able to overcome that because of his intangibles. Jalen Carter may never be able to reach his potential because of his intangibles. And that contrast, to me, is pretty interesting.
Back when I was covering college basketball, I had an NBA talent evaluator say that sometimes players get criticized, and it sounds like criticism, but really the fact of the matter is that the sports played at the highest level are freak shows. They're absolute freak shows, and guys with the greatest intangibles and the greatest talent, if they don't have that freak show element in terms of just like next level length or size or explosion or speed or whatever it is, they can wash by the wayside really quickly. And so I'm a believer in who Peter Skronsky is. The question for the Bears at number 9 is, do you see him as a tackle? Because the talk on the league is like, you may have to bump him inside the guard because that arm length just isn't what you'd want it to be for a prototypical left tackle. And if you're going to move a guy into guard, do you really want to pick him at 9? And so those are the questions, like internally in the draft meetings, as you go through all of the things that you go over on a prospect, you have to stop there. Because we're not talking about round 3. We're not talking about round 4, where if you do have to kick a guy inside the guard, you go, okay, whatever, he can help us there. This is a top 10 pick, and top 10 picks are to be a success with a top 10 pick, you want a guy who's an immediate impact starter and projects as a multiple-time Pro Bowler. That's what you get in the top 10 to be a success. And so that's a hard question. It's stupid. I get it. It's like, what can I do? My arm lengths is 32 and a quarter or whatever Peter's are. It's somewhere in that range, but it matters, and so the Bears are going to have to decide how much it matters.
Perfect segue, because you wonder about these draft boards. You wonder about what teams value, and you wonder if somebody who might be perfect for the Bears might not be perfect for somebody else, or the Lions might be ideal consider somebody ideal for their organization where the Bears would reject. So Jimmy Johnson, who invented the draft chart, the value chart, and proudly still can talk about that, has a book out called Swagger, perfectly titled book, Swagger, and it is his memoir. And he was on the Mully and Haugh show on Tuesday. And he was asked by Mully and I, we talked to him about this very thing. You know, when you're looking at guys, when you go into a draft based on need, based on the best player available, what is his general philosophy going back to when he did it right for the Cowboys and certainly, you know, became the Hall of Fame executive and coach that he became. This is the way that conversation went.
How aggressive would you be with that 9th pick? And I sat there with you. I mean, I know how aggressive you like to be with your picks in trades. You know, would you still be aggressive in moving up, moving down to get the guy you want? What's your thoughts there?
Well, yeah, you know, teams have come down here over the years, and they asked me about drafting, and a half a dozen of them said the best thing I ever told them was I would take 3 players in every round that I really wanted them. They were my kind of guys. You know, they were players that are going to help our football team. Forget about this best player available bull crap. You know, you'll get players that are going to help your team. And so I would have 3 players in every round, and you can figure out who's going to take you. You know, talk to the beat writers from other teams. You know, you can get the scuttlebutt of who teams are looking for. And, you know, when it came close to our pick, you know, if, you know, two or one of those players is available, I would take them. If they weren't, I would move out of the pick. You know, I didn't ever take the philosophy to take the best player available because I wanted to take the best player available that I wanted.
Certainly, that was Dave Wanstead asking the questions and setting up the interview. Thank you to Coach Wanstead for that. But, Dan, pretty fascinating against the grain thought. Again, that was 30 years ago. Things have changed, but that's the way Jimmy Johnson did it.
Well, I like it. I wrote down my kind of guys, right? Because that gives you a leg up. If they're your kind of guys and you know right away that you've got a chance to have the relationship start off on the right foot. I've had a rant for the last 6 or 7 years about this whole, like, you got to take the best player available. You got to stay true to the board. You got to stay true to the board. Every year we learn that the board is always wrong, right? Like, it's not a cheat sheet. It's not an answer key. It's always wrong. 5 years down the road, someone will take this board and they'll redraft it and it'll be completely different than it is now. So the board is wrong. So take your kind of guys. Take the guys that you know can fit into what you're doing. Take the guys that you have a connection with. Do those things. Like, I think that, like, we've overcomplicated it. The board is always wrong. I'm going to say this a million times before we get to the last weekend of April because it's true. It's wrong every single year. No rating system has ever been close to right when you look back on things 5 years down the road. So, like where Jimmy's at. The footnote to this, David, is I've got a 10U House League draft this Saturday, right? I'm the assistant GM of the Glenview Royals for the 10U division, and I wrote down my kind of guys, and we're going to have to reconfigure our draft board before we get to Saturday, so we get my kind of guys on the Royals.
I can't imagine the Eagles are going to crush this weekend, those poor kids.
We've already taken some kids off the board because of character concerns.
Jimmy, you're not my kind of guy. Billy, sorry, you either. Okay. Jimmy Johnson, I think what he's saying without necessarily putting in those terms, my kind of guys means, you know, he's following his instincts, and it may tell him things that you cannot measure. And every draft, and it's the oldest thing in sports, is that, you know, you'd show me, you see examples of players, and the Bears signed one this week in TJ Edwards. He joined the linebacker core with Jack Sanborn. These are things that guys, terrible measurables, but they're my kind of guys as somebody who likes defensive football, who likes hard-nosed football. So he's talking about that. Now, Jimmy also said that he wouldn't draft an offensive lineman or a wide receiver in the first round because those are the days that he felt like, you know, you couldn't get away with that. You could find those guys other places. It was maybe the modern day equivalent of running backs because of premium positions and the way that they valued things back in the early 90s. But it was fascinating to hear him talk about his philosophy. So while we had him on the air, of course, when Ryan Poles makes such a huge trade, one of the biggest trades in Bears history, gets DJ Moore and the draft picks from the Carolina Panthers who moved up, we had to ask Jimmy Johnson, what did you think of the trade?
I think, you know, really it can be beneficial for both Carolina and Chicago. And as I've said for years, really, getting a bunch of picks, it's great. But, a lot of teams have gotten picks over the years. Back when Eric Dickerson was traded from the Rams, they got a ton of picks. RG3, as far as Washington, when they traded for him, teams have gotten picks over the year. Cleveland Browns, they've had number one picks forever. And so it's not the picks, it's what you do with the picks. And as long as Chicago is able to use those picks and pick the right players, it is a great trade for Chicago. Now, by the same token, you look at Carolina, if they don't pick the right quarterback, it's a bad trade for them. They've got to pick the right quarterback. So, I think it can be beneficial for both teams. It just depends on how they use those picks.
Pretty good analysis.
No, I agree. And you've heard me talk about that RG3 trade a lot, because that was at the time, it was like, oh my God, look at the windfall that the Rams got back. This is going to help them build themselves into a perennial contender. And then it didn't. And so, like, Jimmy makes a great point of, it's what you do with those picks, and you better have success with those. And, there was folks trying to liken this deal to the Herschel Walker trade over the weekend and into the early parts of this week. And you're just like, no, we're not there. And so, like, look, like, I think Ryan Poles did as good as we could have expected with taking that number one pick and turning it into more assets. Now it's about turning those assets into things that actually help you win football games. And that's an ongoing process. It's going to take a while to do. Really good insight from Jimmy to that end.
And the other part of it, the conversation we had, he talked about offensive linemen. Now, remember, this is the time where there weren't as many limits on practice time as there are now. The CBA was differently structured, so teams' offensive lines could work more together. They could have more contact. Training camps were more physical, so you could work out kinks easier than you could today. So it came as little surprise that one of his favorite guys, and certainly Dave Wanstead's best friend, Tony Wise, former offensive line coach for the Cowboys, for the Bears, and just an offensive line coaching legend, really. Tony Wise is somebody that Jimmy Johnson remembers being able to turn guys into players that many people didn't think they could be. And his overall philosophy, because of Tony Wise's impact, what he could do with the typical offensive lineman and the role of the offensive line coach. And this is what he had to say.
Howie Long and Michael Strahan get mad at me when I say this. Offensive line, that's the one position that the coach is more valuable than the players. And because if you've got a great offensive line coach, which Tony Wise was, he can develop some of those players. Just like taking Sebnowski. Sebnowski was a 245-pound guard. I said, Tony, can you make him into a center? He said, Coach, I can make him into a center. He had never played center before in his life. We moved him to center. He ended up being a Pro Bowler for us. And so the offensive line coach is a heck of a lot more important than taking an offensive lineman with the 9th pick.
Wow. I have to tell you, that one I didn't expect because of just how much the reality, it seems like we're always saying talent prevails. But he's got examples, and certainly he lived through it, and now he's got the Super Bowl rings to prove that he really, that's a philosophy he believes in. And it came true for him.
If I'm Bears offensive line coach Chris Morgan, I'm clipping that soundbite. I'm going to get the contract of the first 3 offensive linemen drafted in April, and I'm taking them to Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles and going, hey, you guys want to put these 2 things together? I'm the most valuable thing you got going in your building right now. So we'll see. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see where they land with the collection of people that they bring on the offensive line. And then it's Chris Morgan's job to blend them into one and to contribute to the no excuses tour, because we need that offensive line to be stable and sturdy and have continuity and depth and all those things so that we can do a fair evaluation of the 2023 Bears. And I know they're going to get that done, right? We have great conviction and certainty that they're going to get that done.
Before we get out of here, I have to tell you a little bit about kind of behind the curtain with the Jimmy Johnson interview. So obviously he works for Fox, and obviously he's one of Dave Wanstead's best friends, which is how he ended up on our show, the Mully and Haugh show. So he was on at 8 o'clock, and Dave's segment before that was at 7:45, and we have a break before Jimmy's all set. And, Dave's very conscientious. Dave showed up at 7:05. He's early for everything. Coach Wanstead is, Lombardi time, Tom Coughlin time. There's Wanstead time. He's 15 minutes before those guys. Anyway, so he's there. He's prepared. And during the break, once a coach, always a coach. So in the studio, Mully's over here. I'm over here. Dave's in the middle. And he's like, all right, guys, we're going to get Jimmy on. Now, I thought, Mully, you'll bring us back. And then when you bring us back, then I'm going to ask him about maybe the draft pick. And then you guys go and you can ask him. And then, Dave, you can ask him. And I just thought, and he's writing this down like, okay, he's diagramming a play. This is our halftime. He's got his first half. It was a good segment. But now we're rallying. We're getting ready for Jimmy. All right, so then you got to ask him about the book. Mully, before we're done, ask him about the book. It's a great book. We got to ask him about the book. And so, we're taking notes. We're suppressing our laughter because Dave cares so much. And you know what? We came back. Yeah. Mully brought us back like we usually do. Mully and Haugh, welcome to Chicago Sports Radio 670 Score. Dave comes in. He introduces Jimmy. He gets the interview going. Radio pro, TV pro, not a nicer guy in the world. Dave Wanstead also can now add radio producer to his long list of accomplishments on his resume.
Tony Wise has got mayonnaise dripping from his chin as he comes in. It was a great interview, David. It was really, really good. And then probably the kicker of it all was the sign off with Jimmy Johnson peddling his new book. It's called Swagger, right? Yeah. And he says, I figure anybody that's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the College Football Hall of Fame, and the Broadcasting Hall of Fame ought to write a book called Swagger. Right?
He's unapologetic. He was great. You can listen to that entire interview if you want. It's on the free Odyssey app. Go to the Mully and Haugh podcast from Tuesday, March 14th. It was in the 8 o'clock hour. You'll want to go back, rewind, listen, because it was a lot of fun.
If you're looking for my 10U mock draft, that will be out on Friday night for the fourth grade Royals. We'll have the mock draft out. I also wanted to make one final point that Aaron Rodgers' response to Adam Schefter was similar to when I first texted you in 2013 and said, hey, there's a job open at the Tribune that I'm up for. And you texted back, lose my number, good try, though.
You kept that one, huh? I thought I'd forgotten that. Was that you? I could have sworn that was Campbell. I didn't know. And you know what? It shows you how much respect I garnered. I sent you that text. They hired you anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So here we are all these years later. We're about to take the North and never give it back.
Okay. And on Thursday, Ryan Poles will meet the media. There may be some more moves to talk about. You know what? We'll get together again in 24 hours, and we'll talk about what he said, what's coming next, and you can join us, download, listen, and subscribe. But we've just got through a lot of stuff on this Wednesday. Things are fluid. Remember that when listening, but we thank you for your time on this Take the North podcast. Dan, anything else?
Yeah, we'll get DJ Moore, Tremaine Edmonds, and the others too at Hallis Hall on Thursday. So a meet and greet up at 1920 Football Drive. Looking forward to that.
Looking forward to it as well. All right, we will talk to you tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in tonight on the Take the North podcast on your free Odyssey app. Also, watch us on the YouTube page, on the 670 Score YouTube page. Thanks for listening. For Adam Sadzinski, Dan Wiederer, I'm David Haugh. Talk to you tomorrow.
Great talk. See you out there.